and welcome. I'm Akosua Prempe, broadcasting to you from the United States of Africa. Tonight we bring you a pivotal speech delivered by Burkina Faso's Prime Minister at the United Nations General Assembly's 80th session. In this address, you'll hear the urgent call for real reform at the UN, demands for Africa's rightful voice on the global stage, and a passionate defense of sovereignty and unity, not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. The Prime Minister challenges international institutions, confronts external interference, and underlines the need for true partnership and self-determination across the continent. Before we dive in, let's stay connected and build this community of change makers together. Don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Share this video with friends and family. Let's spread the message and foster unity across Africa and beyond now. Let's listen to this historic speech that's inspiring a new wave of Pan-African solidarity.
Statement by His Excellency Rimtalda Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo, Prime Minister and Head of Government of Burkina Faso. I ask the protocol to accompany His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I have the distinct honor and great privilege of speaking on behalf of Comrade President Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Faso, Head of State, on the occasion of this session, to bring forth the voice of the dignified and upright people of Burkina Faso. He has also entrusted me to convey his fraternal greetings to all citizens of the world who cherish peace and freedom. Madam President, on behalf of Burkina Faso, I extend my warmest congratulations to you on your election as President of this 80th session. Your election reflects the international community's confidence in your leadership, your ability to listen, and your commitment to dialogue. You will find in Burkina Faso a sincere, constructive, and committed partner. To your predecessor, Mr. Philemon Niang, I express my gratitude for the quality and rigor of the work accomplished during the 79th session. Madam President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Burkina Faso fully endorses the statement delivered on behalf of the Confederation of Sahel States by our sister Republic of Mali. Together with Niger, we share a community of goals and aspirations within a space of renewal and change. Mr. Secretary General, Burkina Faso wishes to acknowledge the contribution of the United Nations system and its partners in our shared quest for stability and prosperity. This significant session, taking place precisely 80 years after the official adoption of the United Nations Charter, is indeed an ideal opportunity to truly pause and conduct a thorough, honest assessment of our esteemed organization. This is the reflection proposed by the theme, Working Better Together over 80 years in the service of peace, development, and human rights. While it is framed as a renewal of our mutual commitment to a world that prioritizes equity and justice and to a more effective multilateralism, this theme truly reflects the ideal approach that should guide every nation, every sub-regional, regional, and international grouping. A session that should embody a moment of solemn celebration instead calls for deep introspection. The record of the United Nations over the past 8 decades, far from inspiring joy, more closely resembles an embarrassing fiasco, a collective disillusionment, and a structural failure. Since the duty of truth compels us, we must humbly acknowledge that although the overall picture shows some achievements, it remains negatively marked by 8 decades of severely tested optimism, 8 decades of disappointed hope, 8 decades of broken dreams, in short, 8 decades of crucial missed opportunities. Unfortunately, this is the dark image of a UN that many of our predecessors from 1945, if they were still alive, would have had difficulty accepting. It is therefore difficult to take satisfaction in such a mixed record. How can we understand that Africa, the cradle of humanity and home to so many conflicts, representing more than 1 billion human beings, remains excluded from the decision-making bodies of the Security Council? How can we truly accept that these peacekeeping missions, which are funded at the significant cost of billions of dollars, ultimately leave our countries with even more frustration and profound suffering than they do with any truly tangible and lasting results? Yet the causes of this collective failure are well known to all, especially to the member states themselves, who for decades have devoted their energies within the General Assembly to defending noble causes and proposing realistic reforms without ever succeeding. What exactly can be done if the non-binding decisions of the United Nations General Assembly make it inherently inaudible and ultimately ineffective? Could we have hoped for a better outcome with a Security Council plagued by the politicization of its decisions, rendered impotent by these inconsistencies, and inefficient due to its ongoing divisions? Even worse, this council, whose role has now been debased, presents itself as a major troublemaker due to the tacit, insidious, and sometimes even active complicity of some of its permanent members, who themselves are major players and principal financiers of the crises of our time. This is what our Security Council has become, a truly disastrous enterprise, it must be said, which, due to the predatory ambitions of some of its permanent members, can, among other things, decide which country will be placed on the agenda of international terrorism or in which other to send peacekeeping operations as if to further legitimize its own role. Thus, we are left powerless as we witness the failure of initiatives that are in fact well-founded due to rivalries between states and unresolved crises, the most emblematic of which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that has gone on for far too long. The culpable inaction of the international community in the face of terrorists' defiance of state authority, terrorists who are financed and supported by other states, adds to all these troubling paradoxes. The time has come for a surge of action and courageous reforms. Without this, the Security Council will remain an anachronistic institution, incapable of meeting the challenges of our time. Ladies and gentlemen, in a world undergoing profound change, marked both by the rise of digitalization and the persistence of geopolitical tensions, it has become imperative to rethink our economic development strategies. International trade can no longer be approached through the rigid and unbalanced paths that have been imposed upon us, but must instead be redirected towards strengthening economic autonomy, local transformation of resources, and the promotion of genuine social justice. It is now recognized that sustainable prosperity depends on proactive policies of industrialization, local value addition to our raw materials, and the creation of decent jobs, especially for young people. That is why it is urgent to respond. It is urgent to break the cycle of dependence on raw material exports, a model that increases the vulnerability of our economies and inevitably hinders our emergence. In Burkina Faso, presidential initiatives reflect this firm determination to build a productive, inclusive, and resilient economy, capable of offering new opportunities to our fellow citizens. It is in this spirit that my country reaffirms its commitment to building a multilateral trading system that is fairer and more equitable, based on international solidarity and making full use of scientific, technological, and innovative advances, a true lever for sustainable and shared development. Madam President, my country, like other nations in the Sahel, is going through one of the most difficult trials in its history. For nearly a decade, Burkina Faso has been under attack by terrorists supported by shadowy forces. These groups covet our resources. They seek to break our sovereignty and impose the law of chaos. But far from giving in, we have chosen dignity and resistance. Under the leadership of our comrade President, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, we have decided to take our destiny into our own hands. By mobilizing our defense and security forces, supported by the volunteers for the defense of the homeland, true everyday heroes, and by establishing the Patriotic Support Fund, financed by the voluntary contributions of our citizens, our diaspora, and friends of Burkina Faso around the world. Since 2023, this fund has already collected more than 413 billion CFA francs, a striking testament to the unity and patriotic awakening of our people. By undertaking historic reforms to achieve food sovereignty, rehabilitate our lands, revive our agricultural production, and reduce our dependence on imports. These efforts, carried out by a determined people, are bearing fruit. More than 72% of our territory has been reclaimed, thousands of internally displaced people are returning to their communities, and schools are reopening. Social services are coming back to life. In this way, Burkina Faso demonstrates that a united and resolute people can overcome even the toughest challenges. In any case, Burkina Faso reaffirms with full responsibility that its priorities are non-negotiable and that its choices must be respected now more than ever. Ladies and gentlemen, we are guiding our actions according to the virtues of solidarity and unity, with a deep conviction that a people united around a common ideal can achieve great things. The combined efforts of our fellow citizens at home and abroad, and their enthusiastic support for the momentum we have initiated, reassure us of the soundness of the choices we have made under the leadership of the Comrade President of Faso. The excitement generated by the Patriotic Support Fund and the presidential Faso Mibo initiative is a perfect illustration of this. Established in 2023 in support of the Action Plan for Stabilization and Development, the Patriotic Support Fund is intended to mobilize additional national resources from within the country in order to strengthen our defense and strategic investment capacities. This fund has generated massive support both within the country and among our diaspora. Madam President, the methodical continuation of our reforms allows us today to acknowledge major progress in economic governance, better control of public spending, optimized management of state human resources, streamlining of institutional expenses, and the maintenance of sustainable debt levels. These efforts are also evident in the fairer redistribution of national wealth, so that the abundant resources of our territory fully benefit the citizens who contribute to the country's development, rather than a few external interests or their local proxies. Despite the challenges inherent to the security and humanitarian crisis, government actions covering all areas of socio-economic development have achieved notable successes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we are surprised by the condescending attitudes of certain UN agencies that allow themselves to interfere in our national debate through biased narratives that are disconnected from the realities on the ground. We firmly reject the report entitled Children and Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso, which is riddled with falsehoods and whose very title amounts to semantic manipulation. On this occasion, I would like to commend the courage of our fighting forces and pay tribute to the civilian and military martyrs who fell with honor in defense of our sovereignty. Madam President, as we have always stated, terrorism has become a convenient pretext for certain states to plunder Africa's resources. Thus, our countries find themselves confronted by terrorists who are, in reality, nothing more than auxiliaries of predatory foreign armies. Some states, moreover, no longer even bother to hide the public support they provide to these criminals. This is the case with France, under the Macron regime, whose public media, in addition to daily disinformation, have become mouthpieces for the criminals' propaganda. These are the perpetrators of cowardly and barbaric attacks carried out against peaceful citizens. On this subject, we renew our call regarding the follow-up to the letter dated August 20th, 2024, sent by the member states of the Confederation of Sahel States to the Security Council, which to this day remains unanswered. This persistent silence further discredits the institution, thank you, and casts doubt over an implicit complacency. Even more concerning, some members of the Security Council continue to trample on Resolution 1373, which is binding and requires the suppression of terrorist financing, the strengthening of border controls, and increased international cooperation in the Sahel. We have taken note of this reality and have adapted our security measures accordingly, while also revising our methods of cooperation with certain countries. Madam President, we remain convinced that the United Nations must continue to serve as a central framework for dialogue and cooperation. But we call for a renewed partnership based on mutual respect, equality, and genuine solidarity. Ladies and gentlemen, in the face of common threats and external interference, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have joined forces to establish the Confederation of Sahel States. The AES is not a withdrawal, much less a closing off. It is an assertion, the assertion of our right to self-determination, to define our own priorities and to build regional cooperation that serves exclusively our peoples. It is a choice of dignity. It is the rejection of a system in which our countries too often served as a playground for external agendas. It is the determination to be the main actors in our own history and to write the future of our children ourselves. The AES follows in the footsteps of the struggle led by Pan-Africanist figures such as Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, and Kwame Nkrumah. Today, a new generation of leaders is carrying this torch with the firm conviction inspired by the father of the August 1983 revolution that only struggle brings liberation. Madam President, for 8 decades, Africa has been legitimately demanding its place on the Security Council. It is time to profoundly reform our organization. More concretely, this means carrying out a bold reform of the Security Council by granting Africa permanent representation and improving resource management to make the UN more effective and closer to the people it claims to serve. To firmly address the structural causes of international injustice, whether it be the instrumentalization of terrorism, the blockade of Cuba, sanctions against Venezuela, Russia, Iran, Nicaragua, or the deadlock in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Burkina Faso subscribes to China's vision of a community with a shared future. In the specific case of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, we reaffirm our unwavering support for these people who have endured for decades campaigns of isolation, illegal sanctions, and incessant provocations. In the face of this blatant interference in the sovereign affairs of a nation and this economic aggression with disastrous humanitarian consequences, we express our solidarity with this country, which is resisting with dignity to preserve its right to choose its own destiny without ultimatums or foreign dictates. We therefore call for reason and diplomacy so that all hostile actions against Venezuela come to an end. Mr. Secretary General, I would now like to address you directly. It is truly time for our organization to change its paradigm because the UN now finds itself in the same situation as the defunct League of Nations. It is unable to make its voice heard and to enforce its own principles, unable to implement its decisions and resolutions on the powerful, unable to uphold international law, unable to resolve the many conflicts, and unable to evolve and rise to the level of today's challenges. Mr. Secretary General, you have a great opportunity to make history by taking responsibility for a profound transformation of this organization, which inspired so much hope at its creation. You have the firm support of millions of citizens around the world to make this organization a true guarantor of peace and security in the world, and not an instrument of domination in the hands of the powerful of the moment. Despite various pressures and power struggles, we know you are resourceful enough to free the United Nations and raise it to the level of our shared ambitions. Madam President, turning to development issues, Burkina Faso welcomes the holding of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development and expresses the hope that the conclusions of the Seville meeting will contribute to the emergence of a more equitable financial architecture, one that respects the sovereignty of states and supports real transformation in developing countries. In the same vein, it remains imperative to address the factors that hinder the full achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are meant to positively transform our world under the auspices of the United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, 80 years after the United Nations Charter, our organization is far from having fulfilled the hopes of 1945. 80 years later, the world is full of injustices and suffering, and the risks of another widespread conflict are becoming clearer and are a source of concern for the future. But it is not too late to give our common home the momentum it lacks. Burkina Faso, true to its Pan-Africanist heritage, reaffirms its faith in a renewed, just and equitable multilateralism. We are determined to defend our sovereignty and our dignity, but we reach out to all nations that cherish justice, freedom, and solidarity. Long live a reformed and credible United Nations organization. Long live the Confederation of Sahel States. Long live Burkina Faso, dignified, sovereign, and standing tall. Homeland or death, we shall overcome. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I would like to thank the Prime Minister and the heads of government of Burkina Faso. Thank you.